and Alex. CIA on the ceremonial cornerstone of the headquarters in Langley, CIA Director Alan Dulles had put in the Gospel of John 8:32, know the truth and the truth will set you free. Does it sound like something the CIA would put up now? So once you see what Mark Morgan showed and what Alex just showed, and you accept the fact that this is deliberate, it all makes sense. So from the point of the CIA, it's no better. In fact, because they operate in such secrecy, it's far worse. So there's so many aspects of this, but what I'd like to focus on right now is sort of going back to find out, where did this start? And how did it start? It didn't start with Obama. It started during World War II, before we had an intelligence service. The World War II was going on in 1940, before our involvement. The British persuaded President Roosevelt to set up a foreign intelligence service. Wild Bill Donovan was the one who headed it up. His job was to fight the Axis powers. And when he did that, he was taking anybody he could to fight the Nazis and their allies. But in so doing, he brought in Communist Party members and Soviet agents who had come to our country to escape the Axis. And while you could say, well, we need some of these people for their linguistic expertise or their knowledge or their personal networks, there was no consideration given to the fact that they were in there to help win World War II on Stalin's terms, not on ours. So if you look at the origins of American intelligence, you find from day one, the number 2 British Secret Service man at the British Embassy, Dickie Ellis, was himself a double agent for Stalin. He was the main British intelligence officer involved with Donovan to set up the Office of Strategic Services. To the point that when it was, the Philby network was brought into all of this, the Cambridge Five, the Donovan's right-hand man, a man named Lee, turned out also to have been a Soviet double agent the whole time. So the OSS was riddled from top to bottom with Communist Party members, Communist Party ideologues, and recruited Soviet agents of the NKVD and the military GRU. Now, J. Edgar Hoover was warning about this, and if you look back at J. Edgar Hoover and what he was really doing for us, since he was a 25-year-old Justice Department lawyer, his job was to identify foreign radicals and subversives, communists, anarchists, and radical socialists, round them up and deport them. That was his first job. So when the time came for him to lead what became the FBI, that was Hoover's job. Oh, this is even better, great. To round up subversives and send them back to where they came from. So you think a man like that was warning all of his life about really where we became today, which is the complete subversion of our society from top to bottom. Let's get back to the CIA, because we didn't have a counterintelligence service either to go after these foreign spies and foreign agents who had infiltrated our wartime intelligence services. So by the time we saw some slides before about the Yalta Conference, and you look at who was kept out of advising the President of the United States for the agenda at Yalta, where the giveaway took place, say the George F. Kennans of the world, the liberal anti-communists, were kept away. People like Alger Hiss were the ones in the inner circle drawing up this agenda. He was then at the State Department. So look at this mess that was inherited. You even had Donovan being dragged before Congress about the communists he'd surrounded himself with within the OSS, and he actually lied to Congress about it. A lot of this was verified 50 years later after the declassification and publication of the Venona transcripts. This was the Army Signal Corps intercepts of Soviet encrypted communications during the war. And once they were declassified and made available to friends like Herb Romerstein and Stan Evans and so many others, we got to know the real absolute truth of what was known at the time. Hoover had access to this. He didn't tell President Roosevelt about it. He never told Harry Truman about it because he didn't trust them, because who they had surrounded themselves with. It would have compromised the integrity of the intelligence that we had. So when the time came to set up the CIA a few years after World War II, a lot of these same Soviet agents and Communist Party members, and some were the same, of course, were kept out of the CIA. So where did they go? Many of them went to the State Department. Many of them went into higher education. And I'd like to look at some of those higher education people to show this, what Diana West calls a red thread, because it goes to explain what has happened to our CIA, like the rest of our government and society, but just looking at the CIA specifically. In the early 1930s, right after Hitler took power, a group of German academics set up shop at Columbia University. They had transferred from Frankfurt, Germany, at Goethe University, fled Hitler. Some went to England, some went to France, some went to the United States, and one of them, a group around Theodor Adorno and Herbert Marcuse, set up shop at Columbia University in a deal that was arranged by a Soviet intelligence officer, or agent rather, as the Venona transcripts proved. This was the Frankfurt School in the United States, where Marcuse and the others developed critical theory. This is where critical law theory comes from. To weaponize our constitutional law and our legal system to achieve predetermined political ends. So by the 1980s, practically every law school in the country was teaching critical law theory. And because there was no market for critical law theory in private practice, to speak of, many of these lawyers, thousands of them ultimately, went into the federal government, the Justice Department, the FBI, the intelligence community, and elsewhere. The same thing for those studying regional studies. So you saw previously about China and some academics on China and OSS sellout of Chiang Kai-shek and the other anti-communists in China. You had the China studies programs, you had the Russia studies programs, you had the Latin American affairs programs, all being taken over by Marxists and critical theorists, for the most part. So that if we look at our border today and look at our expertise on the countries south of our border today, can you name a single university in the country where the Western Hemisphere studies programs are not taken over by critical theorists? So who's providing the intellectual base for our intelligence analysts, our intelligence officers, our diplomats? It's these universities. And so while we do have some really excellent ones still in the system, really first-rate ones, by and large, you look at the intelligence products they're producing, and we can see it from the leaks and the declassifications, it's garbage. So how is it that right now we're facing an internal threat to our country, a terrible internal threat to our country, where you have the source code of electronic voting machines developed by the Venezuelan government with the advice and, in fact, the supervision of the Cuban intelligence service, is now operating the software of the majority of electronic voting and tabulation machines in our country and in 71 other countries around the world. What does this mean? Why didn't the CIA pick this up? It's its job to pick this up, even though the U.S. Embassy in Caracas actually did pick this up and actually did warn about this. Ambassador Brownfield warned about this years ago, and we know about this because the documents were published on WikiLeaks. So you have the CIA not doing its job. You have the FBI counterintelligence, which is a train wreck in its own right, not doing its job. By statute, its job is to defend us against this, and it has completely failed. There'll be some more news coming out about this next week, and it's not my job to tell it to you early because it's not my handiwork, but it's quite a story to see who the Americans were who were knowingly facilitating with the Cuban and the Venezuelan regimes to make this happen. People trusted by our government leaders, including by a lot of Republicans, even conservatives, even people we like. And there was nobody on the intelligence or the counterintelligence side to warn us away. So back to the CIA. What had happened in the CIA? You had, the World War II OSS generation died out by the 70s or retired out by the 70s. You had Frank Church in the Church Committee, and you had a very cooperative CIA director, Bill Colby, exposing all of this in an effort to try to cleanse the CIA and really help the CIA. Jimmy Carter comes in, wipes out our clandestine service. The anti-communists are pretty much driven out of the CIA by this time. This is late 70s. Reagan comes in early 1981 with Bill Casey as his CIA director, with a whole plan to roll back Soviet communism. And Casey said to people who were coming with key information and key things that could be done, don't tell this to anybody in the agency. They'll screw it up. So Casey on his own set up his own side operation. It wasn't the Ollie North network. It was something that he funded out of his pocket. He was replicating what he himself did in the OSS when he was brought in as a young man, as a young Navy officer. Donovan, to his credit, he wasn't a communist. He wasn't a Marxist or a leftist. He was just trying to do his job in a big hurry. In fact, he was a conservative Republican. But he just didn't know. So so he brought Casey and Bill Colby and so many other CIA greats got their start in the OSS by being very unorthodox, they didn't have lawyers telling them what they can and can't do. They just went and accomplished the mission. So that's what Casey went and did. And his advice was, as was the advice of people like the great Angelo Codevilla and others, if you really want to do this kind of work to defend your country, you have to do it privately. Because if you go into the CIA, it'll grind you down and spit you out. So luckily there were people in there who weren't ground down or spit out, but a lot of them are gone, and most of those remaining have checked out early, or even the newer ones by the time they hit age 50, even before they're eligible for retirement, full retirement, they check out and leave because of the climate that's in there now, which is DEI. So if you consider that the CIA, the National Security Agency, and our whole 18-agency intelligence community is obsessed with DEI before anything else, you can see where we're going with everything else. That chart you just saw earlier, all these other things, it's all tied in. So look at, let's say CIA recruitment. What can we see from the outside, not just depending on what people know from the inside? CIA recruitment, starting under Trump, was publicly to attract the most mentally disturbed, emotionally troubled, least qualified tokens into the intelligence community for the purpose of promoting DEI ideology, critical race theory, and other forms of critical theory. So the critical in critical theory, some call it cultural Marxism. Some say, no, we can't call it that because people will lose it. Actually, it is cultural Marxism because the whole critical part of critical theory is to what Marx called relentlessly criticize every aspect of civilization until it's destroyed. That goes from love of country, that goes from Judeo-Christian ethics, even Greco-Roman ethics and forms of democracy and republicanism, everything to do with human nature, family, nuclear family, all morals, all to be relentlessly criticized until people no longer believe in it and it's destroyed. This was the Karl Marx of 1843, 5 years before he became an economist and wrote the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, and you can see how he certainly lived that life. The Bolsheviks replicated this. It's often overshadowed. They replicated it. They had a Hungarian Bolshevik in the Bela Kun regime who actually was one of the founders of critical theory with Herbert Marcuse. So trace this red thread back now to how it's consumed the CIA. What were its origins? We'll get to them in just a minute. But I want to look at the CIA today. You had Donald Trump came in before, didn't even think he was going to win, didn't really plan for a transition, didn't really have a strategy for taking over the government. Okay, he's learned his lesson. Brought in a guy like Mike Pompeo, good man, terrible CIA director. The CIA bureaucracy ran him like an op. They had him tour different CIA stations around the world, kept him out, said he didn't really need a politically appointed deputy, held him hostage. This person who was a senior CIA officer in the UK, Gina Haspel, his right-hand person, huge DEI proponent. She ran the agency while Pompeo was there, and then after a year or so in office, Pompeo left and somehow was fooled into telling Trump, let's make Gina Haspel CIA director. So Obama's executive orders from 2011 to impose DEI throughout the whole government were imposed with a vengeance by the Office of Director of National Intelligence. That's the head of this George W. Bush created centralized coordination apparatus for the whole intelligence community. And imposed DEI really viciously because there was a lot of resistance to it. This was under General James Clapper. And then ultimately with a very enthusiastic John Brennan as CIA director to force this on the intelligence community to pull up DEI, pull up these sort of radical and unprofessional personnel, but ideologically pure personnel from the bottom who had been recruited already. Sometimes just in the normal course of recruitment and sometimes deliberately sought out for recruitment. So in the CIA, you had pre-existing what they called agency resource groups, ARGs. In the rest of the intelligence community there and government bureaucracy in general, they're called employee resource groups or ERGs. So the ARGs in the CIA and the ERGs elsewhere in the intelligence community operated and operate today sort of like the old Communist Party cells operated, or still operate for all we know. Identity groups based on grievances, based on who can be a member of the group and who can't, secretive, have a different agenda than the agenda that they're there and getting their salaries to and their security clearances and everything else to work on. And their jobs are, well, we have this grievance, we have that grievance, we have this identity, we have that identity. We're going to push this identitarianism throughout our agency. And this was so with the CIA. So by the time Obama took over the intelligence community, they were in place at the bottom. So when Obama put in his DEI management, that DEI management pulled them up from the bottom to take over the legal and human resources nervous centers of the whole intelligence community, starting with the CIA. And this became orthodoxy. This became mandatory. So if you're a CIA officer, well, I got to get along because this is what the president requires, or this is times are changing, or I'm old-fashioned or whatever. I'm just going to keep my head down and do my job. Not even that was enough. Because in typical Marxist fashion, it's not simply enough to go along. You have to break your own moral code and become a collaborator. Become what they call allies. Not in the sense of NATO allies, but allies of the rainbow flag. Allies against Christians of faith and so forth. You have to take part in it. And if you don't take part in it, that's put in your personnel file. And once it's in your personnel file, it's a mark against you. And in certain agencies, if you don't get promoted every 18 months, you're out. So what do you do to keep your job? If you get out, if you can't keep your clearance, you can't be a contractor, what do you do? So you're in this moral dilemma now, living in the Washington, D.C. area, let's say, for the CIA people at headquarters. Very expensive area to live in. You've got a family, you've got whatever else, you've got other plans, you've got retirement plans to go into some other business to build on your career. Now you can't because you have been removed from the agency, or you risk being removed from the agency because you don't go along with cultural Marxism. So that's where we are today at the CIA. Again, there are exceptions of people, but if you look at this, think of the CIA as just a secret State Department, or literally, a Department of Motor Vehicles. If you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, you'll find some good, dedicated people there. Probably not the brightest people on the planet, but still doing their jobs. But others are just, So they're going behind classifications to hide this, so you can't see this. It can't be really audited. But if you look at, there are, 30-odd thousand CIA employees? How many do you think are actually in the clandestine service operating as agents around the world? About 1,500 in the entire world. And if you consider most of those 1,500 don't even leave their embassies, maybe 500. So a multi-billion-dollar agency for 500 declared intelligence officers working in the, undeclared intelligence officers working clandestinely around the world. I brought this up with a group of former CIA station chiefs, recently former ones, so they know the current situation, and they said, take a zero off that 500. They unanimously agreed to this. So 50 of them around there. What do we have a CIA for with 50? To say nothing of the analytical products they produce, which is DEI on practically everything you see. Except the science and technology part, which still has some integrity to it. Similar with the FBI. So this is where we are today. So when you have a senior, the number 2 at the CIA analytical division, was caught last year after the October 7th attacks on Israel, updating her Facebook page so the header had a Palestinian flag in solidarity with Hamas's call to jihad. She's the number 2 in the analytical division of the CIA. You can imagine, with the DEI mentality, how analysts are forced to comply with the groupthink that's required to keep their jobs. And this informs any president, it doesn't matter who that president is, and it informs the rest of our government on how the world works and what decisions we make. So when you see the Iranian agent at the State Department who's running the whole negotiations with Iran, the other Iranian operative at the Pentagon who has all insights into all of our special operations and so forth, it's not a surprise. How can these people get cleared? I don't know, but certainly a lot of people are looking the other way. To say nothing of the fact that the senior special assistant to the president on the National Security Council for intelligence programs. Ever heard of him before? He's one of these sort of anonymous people who's always around. He worked for Adam Schiff on the House Intelligence Committee. He was on both, he was a lawyer on impeachment panels. His name is Maher al-Bitar. Very waspy intelligence name. Maher al-Bitar worked for the UN agency in charge of Palestinians. He's a big Hamas advocate, and he has access to anything he wants in our entire intelligence community because that's his job. He served on Obama's NSC. He was brought on to Biden's NSC from day one. And just last January, he was promoted as special counsel for the president and to expand his portfolio from intelligence programs. He's also in charge of defense. So if you wonder why things are happening certain ways they're happening, it's not an accident. And the CIA is but one component of it. So just to wrap up, just so, something that everybody can refer to, and many of you probably remember. Remember the video ad the CIA put out right when right when Biden became president. It was this very troubled, by her own admission. She said she suffers from imposter syndrome and from certain depressive anxiety disorders. This is a CIA recruitment ad. I am perfect, she says. She's wearing a feminist t-shirt with a fist, like a Bolshevik fist on it. And it keeps focusing in on that revolutionary symbol. And she's dressed all in black. I'm a proud, perfectly made Latinx or Latina or whatever. She does say she's cisgendered, so that's kind of a positive thing. But it's all 32 sentences in this long advertisement where she's just rambling. 30 of them are all about herself. I, me. Not a word about America, not a word about public service. All of the glorifications of diversity, being a female immigrant of color, all of these other things. And this is a prime CIA recruitment ad in its series called Humans of the CIA. This wasn't produced under Joe Biden. It was produced under the Trump administration with director Gina Haspel. So it's proof that anyone can refer to the CIA as targeting people, really disturbed, radicalized individuals, to become U.S. intelligence officers and analysts. The very same way that then CIA Director John Brennan, when he sat with the Congressional Black Caucus in a meeting that he thought was not being recorded, and he said, "We really want diversity at the CIA. I voted for the Communists, for the Communist Party, and I got in. You guys can get in too." And in his memoir, he actually acknowledged this. He said, "Yeah, I voted for Gus Hall for president." It was in the '76 election. And 3 years later, the CIA hired him. So you can see how bad it was already. Think of how it is all these years later. So Brendan, but he didn't say, well, you know what, that was a stupid indiscretion I did right out of college. This is what we can learn from it, that the Soviets are targeting all of us, or the communists are targeting all of us, and this is how I was duped. He didn't say that. No, he wore it as a badge of honor all those decades later with the Congressional Black Caucus to say, come on, you should be encouraging radicals to join our intelligence community. So there are no brakes on this, really. There's no brakes on it. You have Marco Rubio on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's been doing a great job of highlighting this in the CIA, but he's really pretty much alone. So it's something to think about if things go well in the next 5 weeks or so. What do we do with our intelligence transition? What do we do with the CIA, this bloated, overgrown bureaucracy? I mean, you don't need 38,000 people to spy on the climate and produce secret intelligence on gender. And that's what they're doing. So what do we do? So that's one plan. So any conversations you have, not so much with people in the grassroots, because it's really demoralizing and there's really nothing they can do, but at the top, on the transition team, who can you talk to? Which lawmakers can you talk to? There are things that can be done, and it's not so much they need prodding, which, yeah, they will need some prodding, but they really need encouragement to go after this and to create a public demand for changing this kind of thing, because when you think that the people who came into the low level of the CIA in 2009, when Obama came in, are now more than halfway through their careers. They're dominating the bureaucracy now, not just from the low levels, not just from the low levels, but being pulled up through DEI to middle, upper management and human resources, legal, recruiting, and everything else. So they're running the show no matter who will be our next president. So on that happy note, I got the hint, and so I'll take any questions if there's time. No, there's no more time. Okay. Good talking to you all.